I grow a lot of tomatoes, and I grow almost all of them vertically, straight up, like in this tall cattle panel trellis. I'll take twine and I'll train the vines up the twine. But there's another method that's extremely effective and might be easier for you, and that's to use the twine horizontally with a Florida weave. Join me today as I show you how I do that. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, and there are a number of effective ways that you can trellis your tomatoes. In addition to the tall cattle panel hoop, I also am growing a whole bunch of tomatoes against this fence vertically. I use the twine to direct their growth up, and then I attach them to the fence and allow the branches to grow horizontally. The third method that I use is the Florida weave. I like the Florida weave as a pretty effective way to trellis a long line of tomatoes, a row of tomatoes like I have in this metal bed. Typically, many of us, when we have a row of tomatoes, will stake each individual tomato plant, or maybe we'll put a tomato cage around every single tomato plant. Well, you can actually save yourself some time and money, because with the Florida weave you don't need to stake every single plant. Instead, you put the stakes, you put the supports outside the row, and then with some twine we're going to weave it horizontally between the support posts. This is also called a basket weave method or a post and weave method. This project begins by anchoring the support posts. Now, I used 4-inch round 8-foot posts on either side of this bed. And the first step was to take my post hole digger, dig some holes, and then put the posts in. I compacted the soil around the posts, added a little bit more, and then made sure that they were anchored into the ground. Of course, I like my projects to look good, so I also took my level to make sure that the posts were perfectly plumb. You could just as easily use a T-post, and I've done many a Florida weave using these T-posts. A couple years ago I did a video where I showed container gardening and talked about growing different plants in grow bags. Well, I had a long row of grow bags, and I used the Florida weave with T-posts like this. If you look closely in that video behind me, you can see that the tomatoes are supported using the T-posts and Florida weave with the twine. This bed is 8 feet long, and so the posts are 8 feet apart. You can just go ahead and string your twine between these posts, and it'll probably support pretty well. But I find that by adding additional support and try not to have the twine any more than about 4 feet apart is really the best approach. You may see some recommendations where you put posts between every single plant, and I think that kind of defeats the purpose of trying to save time and energy, because why not just stake every single plant if you're going to put a stake between every single plant? With this method, you'll be able to trellis 2 or 3 tomato plants between the supports, and that's really where you get your biggest savings. You usually want to start doing the Florida weave when your tomato plants are about 12 to 15 inches tall. Now, I've let these tomato plants grow just to show you the progression of the weave, and I've pruned off some of the lower branches so the process will be a little easier to see. I begin by tying the twine to the post, and the type of knot really doesn't matter. And then I'll come on the back side of the main stem of the first plant, and then I'll weave to the front side of the next plant. When I get to the intermediate support post, I just wrap the twine around the post. I do an over and under. So the first time I wrapped around, I went under the main line. Now I go over the main line, and that just adds a little bit of tension. And then I'll begin weaving between the plants. Now I'm letting this plant grow into two sections. So I'll start in the back, I'll go to the front, and then I come back towards the back again. And then from the back, I'll go to the other support post and do the under and over. And I'll actually give it another one just for extra anchoring. And then I'll come back the other direction. And this is where the weave becomes important. The first time through, this twine was on the back side of the plant. When we come in this direction, now we put the twine on the front side of the plant. And we continue doing that down the row. Front side, back side, back side, front side. I'll wrap around the support posts just as before, and then I'm weaving in and out all the way down the row. When I get to the post, I'll wrap around, and this time I'll just go ahead and cut the twine with Mala's help and tie it off. I'm not so worried about a up and over and around and through. I'm just tying a knot to hold this line in place. And this first row is complete. Now I'm using a nylon twine. I can reuse this for many years to come. You can use cotton or jute, but those type of twines might break down in the weather, and you might be lucky to just get a single season. Using the nylon, it's strong and it's reusable. Now, we're not done. As the plants grow, we're going to repeat this process. So, if you start when the plants are about 12 to 15 inches tall, this first line should be about 8 inches tall. And as the plants grow, you want to repeat the weaving. So because these are taller plants, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing again with another row. And I'm placing this second row about 8 to 10 inches above the first one. And now I'll just start weaving back and forth again. You can continue the same basic pattern. The idea is that you're just sandwiching the plants as they grow between the front part of the twine and the back part of the twine. And in very little time, we have 2 rows of twine weaving between our tomato plants. When you start using the Florida Weave Trellis method, as soon as the plants are growing, you really don't need additional support other than the primary anchors. Now, for this bed, just so you could see how I would do multiple rows, I went ahead and used bamboo and clips. But you can see, as soon as I take the clips and the bamboo out, the plants are being held in place by the twine that's woven between them. This plant is the tallest on the row, easily supported by the twine, but it's getting tall enough that I really should run a third twine. When I run the next layer of twine up about another 8 inches to support the tall plant on the end, these shorter plants will have to catch up to that twine. But that's not a problem. We'll be able to weave these plants into the higher levels as we go. You can see that with this plant right here. Right now, the twine just runs straight. But as this plant grows, all I have to do is just make a little bit of a weave and then train the growing plant into what is now a back and front reversal. And it's okay to do that with any side branches, with any suckers that you allow to grow. Just weave them in between the twine as they grow vertically. And this isn't exclusively vertical. These plants aren't going to be just a narrow column. I'm going to allow some of those suckers to grow horizontally, which means some of them will overlap other plants. It's no big deal. I'll just weave them as I train them up to the top. And that's really the limiting factor, is how tall your support posts are going to be. You may see that you can only do this with determinate tomatoes. Well, that's not true. You can do it with indeterminate tomatoes as tall as you want to get. This is about 6 feet tall, and when the tomatoes reach the top, I'll go ahead and pinch off, prune the growing tip so they don't get any taller. And I'll allow some of that horizontal growth. In the end, I'm going to be left with a wall of tomatoes to give me the biggest harvest that I can. Determinate tomatoes, it works great on because they typically only grow about 4 feet tall. If you want to grow very tall tomatoes, plan to use very tall supports. It also works well with other vining plants like tomatillos. The same basic weave can hold the tomatillos in place. And you might think that the twine isn't strong enough to support all of the weight. You'll be surprised when you use this method to find out that there's actually a lot of slack in the line as the plants are growing, because most of the weight of the plant is directed straight down into the plant itself. The support posts and the twine distribute the weight that they're supporting pretty evenly. So I've never had a problem with strangling the plants or with any of the twine breaking as long as I use the nylon twine. I'll continue to use this method anytime I have a long line of tomatoes and I want to use just a couple supports and some twine. And I'll definitely be able to use this twine again next year because I'm planning to grow tomatoes in this bed next year as well. If you want to learn more about other trellising methods, well, go ahead and watch one of these videos next. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.